Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We are all familiar with the experience known as dwelling on the past. It has a certain derogatory insinuation associated with it, as if it were a pretty bad thing to be doing. Nobody wants to be accused of dwelling on the past. It suggests some sort of obsession with the past that this person is hooked on like an addiction. It is universally agreed that this is not something that we should be doing. On the other hand, what should we be dwelling on if not the past? Should we dwell on our appearance? Should we dwell on our financial situation? Should we dwell on the latest celebrity scandal? Isn't the past a much better thing to dwell on than any of those? The past is a good deal of our reality. It probably shapes who we are more than anything else. It is our life up till now, and it will continue to be so as long as we live. Maybe these are unfair comparisons. The past is obviously more significant than all of those fleeting things. The only real comparison is to other states of time. What about the present? Perhaps we should dwell on the present more than the past. But if we think about it, there isn't much to dwell on in the present. It is gone as soon as we start dwelling, and then it becomes the past. Maybe the future is a better option to dwell on. But what really is the point of that? It hasn't even happened yet. And who knows if it is going to happen in the way we imagine it when we're dwelling on it. Besides, doesn't dwelling on the future have all the same problems as dwelling on the past? It can be called an obsession. It doesn't really accomplish anything. And it probably leaves us second guessing ourselves every bit as much as dwelling on the past. So as far as things to dwell on go, the past is probably about as good as it gets. Granted, any sort of obsession is likely not a good thing, but if we are going to get obsessed about anything, it is hard to imagine a better candidate for obsession than the good old past. It is like burying oneself into a good book. But in this case, the book isn't about some fictional characters or some real characters whom we probably never knew. This book is about the single most important person in the world, ourselves. Even if we don't like what we read, it is still pretty interesting. On top of that, there are little to no ways of improving our situation or our lives that are better than reviewing the past and figuring out what went wrong. Plus, there are so many things to dwell on that the book never really ends. We can even write in it what we wish to be read. But it is one thing to dwell on the past as an individual person. What about dwelling on the past as a group? This could apply to a small group like a team or a club. It could apply to a company or a group of friends. It could also apply to larger groups like a nation. Members of a nation have to think about their collective past to understand where they came from and how they became who they are. There is almost nothing as productive for a large and influential group like a nation than focusing on its own past and using it to figure out what to do for its future. There are groups that may be larger than a typical nation that also use this collective form of therapy. Religions are the classic example. A good deal of any religion is its past history. Religions tend to be past-oriented, since the great events in the formation of the religion almost always took place in the distant past. The accusation of dwelling on the past is very easily applied to religions, but the defense against this accusation is, what exactly is so terrible about that? Judaism is a prototypical example of a religion which dwells on the past. There is so much in Jewish practice that is focused on the past that it is easy to wonder if there is really anything else to Judaism than its past. For those who like the distant past, there is the entire Bible with all its depth and nuances. For those who like something post-biblical, there is the whole gamut of rabbinic Judaism with all its complexities and wisdom. For those who want something more recent, there is the modern Jewish journey, complete with looking back at life in the old country and celebrating life in the new country. It is filled with the very deepest tragedies that affect human life and victory and renewal that is hard to match anywhere in the history of the world. The past is alive in Judaism, even to the degree that some find obsessive. This week's Parsha is called Pinchas, another title named after a person. In this case, the person, Piנחs, was the hero of an unfortunate incident in which the Israelites stooped to the seduction by the girls of the nation of Moab, which took place in last week's Parsha. The beginning of this week's Parsha describes his reward. He was granted the unique status of becoming a Kohen, the select hereditary group who served in the Mishkan. There is much more in this parsha than just this section, which is actually somewhat brief. We are not going to discuss it this week. Instead, we will be concentrating on an event happening today, meaning Thursday of this week. This is the fast of the 17th day of the month of Tammuz. Tammuz is the official 4th month of the year, assuming the calendar begins in the spring, which was the original arrangement. This makes it the equivalent of the month of July, which is usually where it falls. On the 17th day of this month, there is a national fast day. It is not very well known outside of Orthodox circles, since it is not one of the two major fasts of Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. It is consequently called a minor fast day, along with 2 or 3 others which share this slightly insignificant status. The 17th day of Tammuz is commemorated with a fast since it is the traditionally recognized day in which the walls of Jerusalem were breached prior to their ultimate destruction on the day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, which falls 3 weeks later. It must be admitted that this exact date of the 17th day of Tammuz is fairly unclear in the historical records that exist. It really isn't clear which of the 2 temples that stood in Jerusalem this day applies to. It is generally assumed that it applies to both, even though the events surrounding their destruction took place several hundred years apart from each other. But none of this really matters to traditional Jews. What is important is that something of a tragic nature on a national scale took place somewhere around the 17th day of Tammuz, and that Jews have been fasting in commemoration of this for well over 2,000 years. It goes without saying that fasting an entire day is not easy, especially when falling on what is about the longest day of the year for any Jews in the Northern Hemisphere, which is where Jews have lived for almost their entire history. It is a tough fast for almost everyone who goes the length. What makes it particularly difficult is the hazy nature of the day itself. Like 2 other minor fasts, it really isn't all that clear why we are fasting. Granted, the walls of Jerusalem were breached at some point before the 9th of Av, but why exactly is that a reason for a long and somewhat torturous fast? This question is compounded by a verse in the Bible, which is commonly assumed to refer to most of the traditional fasts recognized universally in Judaism. This verse, which is found in the 8th chapter of the book of Zechariah, reads as follows. Thus says Hashem of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, and the fast of the 5th, and the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th, shall be for the house of Yehuda times of joy and gladness and holidays, love the truth and peace. These 4 fasts mentioned in this verse are traditionally understood to refer to the fast still commemorated. The 4th month refers to the 17th day of Tammuz. The 5th month refers to the 9th day of Av. The 7th month likely refers to Yom Kippur, but it could also refer to a fast commemorated on the day after Rosh Hashanah. And the 10th month refers to the fast on the 10th day of the month of Tevet in the middle of the winter. What this verse is saying is that all of these fast days will one day become days of rejoicing and celebration. The time for fasting will have ended, and they won't become just normal days, but days to rejoice. The question is, when will this prophetic declaration apply? It is clear that up until recently, nobody considered that the time for switching these fasts to celebrations had arrived. But with the founding of modern Israel and the near miraculous rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem, it has been suggested that the time has finally come to eliminate at least one of these fasts. Nobody is pushing to get rid of Yom Kippur, since it is written in the Torah itself. And very few people are pushing to get rid of Tisha B'Av, since the temple has not been rebuilt. The reason for the fast on the 10th of Tevet is quite vague, so it is hard to say if its time has come. But for the 17th of Tammuz, with its somewhat obscure commemoration of the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem, there is certainly reason to question if this prophecy has finally found a time to go into effect. There are walls around the old city of Jerusalem, and the rest of the city is probably a good deal bigger than it ever was in the past. Jerusalem is certainly a ruin no longer. If anything, it is a city that is bursting at the seams and has a future that is about as promising as any city in the world. Why are we fasting? Why aren't we celebrating the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy, at least for this fast? There are no great answers to these questions. The traditionalists will fast even if there is no reason to fast. This is a fast day, and it has always been a fast day, going back to biblical times. There is no solid reason to stop this practice, and certainly something as non-biblical as the rebuilding of modern Jerusalem is no reason to change a well-established custom. Those who disagree with this say that there certainly is a strong reason to stop fasting. We should cease from dwelling on the past and focus more on the present and the future. If anything, the present and the future foretell a glorious new Jerusalem, which will rival its ancient counterpart both in size and in significance. Jerusalem has once again become the center of Judaism, and it is one of the most important and noteworthy cities in the world. On top of all that, we have this prophecy, which seems to foretell something like this very time. This is the debate. Should we continue to dwell in the past, learning from it and keeping the traditional practices associated with it? Or should we look to the present and the future and observe that a profound change has taken place in Jewish history and realize that the time has come to recognize it? It is possible that it is too soon to be asking this question, but it is also possible that the moment has arrived and we should be seizing it fervently. This is a question that every observant Jew should be wondering about as we go through the momentous times in which we are living. Shabbat Shalom.